Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Writers Chat. We are here today with all of our friends and hopefully lots of people watching the recording. We have a special show for you today. I'm here with my co-host, Melissa Stroh, Norma Pores lurking behind the scenes. And we have a very special guest for you today. She's one of our old-time regulars, and we're really glad to have her back sharing with us today about a really great topic. Melissa, you want to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you with us on Writers Chat again. And yeah, excited to have our friend Rhonda with us today. Of course, all of our regulars know that she's one of our longtime friends and members and has presented several times before us and always just brings such great topics to light and just brings insight that, a lot of us never think about, but she's just so great at teaching, and we enjoy having her here. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Rhonda, I'll give you a little introduction to her. Rhonda Dragomir is a multimedia creative who treasures her fairy tale life in central Kentucky, insisting her home is her castle, even if her prince refuses to dig a moat. She is an award-winning writer, and her debut novel was released by Barber Publishing in March of 2024. She is often invited to speak at writers' conferences on topics related to technology and graphics. And we're just so glad to have Rhonda here today to present on the topic of whether or not you need a sensitivity reader. And this is something that's kind of been fairly new in recent years. And so it's a great topic to address and something I think that's important to consider. So we're glad to hear from you today, Rhonda, and I'll just let you take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. I love coming home, and Writers Chat and Serious Writer, that environment always makes me feel at home. In fact, I do have a copy of my book, I Am Prepared, When the Flames Ravaged, published by Barber Books, my debut novel. And if you were to turn to the acknowledgments in the back, you would see a big shout out to Serious Writer Incorporated and Writers Chat, I believe. I haven't read it recently. There's so many words in there, but I have learned so much of what I need to know as a career professional writer from Writers Chat. And yes, I've gone to Serious Writer conferences. They're awesome. Yes, I joined the Serious Writer Club, learned a lot. Awesome, right? But Writers Chat has just its own unique flavor that it has lent to my career. And I am so grateful for Writers Chat. And I always love coming to present what God has taught me and hopefully encourage you to new heights in your writing career. I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm a debut writer, but I am 66 years old. And I don't mind telling you that because I don't usually get offered senior discounts at McDonald's until I ask. So, I'm just getting started, but I also understand the importance of connection, the importance of networking, and the importance of learning things that I do not know. And there is much to learn. And even when I think I've learned it all, I know everything, here comes something out of left field, something new, some new expectation I have not yet discovered, and off I go again on the learning journey. So I hope you will join me in just considering yourself a lifelong learner. When I'm done learning, I expect to arrive at the pearly gates. That's when I'll be done learning, and then I'll start learning on a whole new level, right? So I'm going to share with you today my topic, and let me go ahead and share my screen, and be sure and tell me that you can see it.
Yep.
Okay, and I will just say that Zoom, if you've never presented on Zoom, when it comes up, it knocks out your chat. So I can't see your chat, but I will provide opportunity at the end of our teaching time for you to ask me questions. So I titled this presentation, Am I Insensitive? And not why you need a sensitivity reader, because I think this is where we begin. We begin by asking ourselves, particularly in this climate and this culture, do I respectfully, honestly, searching my heart, Do I harbor racial prejudice, gender prejudice, creed prejudice from my religion? And how will I know that? And how will it affect my writing? The decision to hire a sensitivity reader isn't easy. And some manuscripts, I was chatting earlier, if you're writing spec fiction and you're creating worlds, you might not need a sensitivity reader. But if we are writing, I write historical fiction, and if I have characters or subcultures that are represented in my novel, I need to begin asking myself this really important question. Am I insensitive? Do I harbor ideas or opinions about certain professions, certain races? Do I harbor opinions that are biased? And unconscious bias is a kind of a catchword right now. And I think there is potential for us to be biased by our upbringing, by our teaching, by our environment, by our experiences, and we are unaware of it. I know during all of the business with the riots and the death of George Floyd, which was very tragic, a African-American friend of mine confronted me because she did not think I was outraged enough over what happened. And that really sent me into a tailspin. And just a little bit of my background, both of my parents are social workers, were social workers, taught social work, and were active in that community. I have a degree in social work, and I've worked with disadvantaged people from almost every race. And I felt that I was not prejudiced. However, and I will tell you this, as I went through my own experience with a sensitivity reader, I uncovered a few spots where I needed to stop and say, And the bottom line, I did not know that was offensive. And so this is one of the reasons that we will talk about hiring or using a sensitivity reader. Hiring a sensitivity reader is necessary when your manuscript features characters or topics from a different subculture to yours. Okay, we're all human beings. That's supposed to be a given, although some people question it these days. But within our human experience, some of us are Americans, some might be Canadian, some might be from a nation in Africa or Europe. And each of those countries has a subculture within that subculture. There are cultures within cultures, right? So I am white or Caucasian. I'm an evangelical Christian. All of these are subcultures. I live in rural Kentucky. There's a subculture of its own. It's so funny to me when writers will say, "Oh, you live in Versailles," and I'm like, "No, my subculture is Versailles with two vowels in the middle, the A and the I." It's Versailles, Kentucky, not Versailles. And so I'm not offended by that. All I'm saying is there's a person who does not understand my subculture. So this applies to us in reality, but it also applies to the characters in our books. And when we write them, if you're like me, and I'm going to talk primarily today about fiction, but this can transition to nonfiction as well when you're telling the story. And I hope your nonfiction includes stories. It should, because storytelling is powerful. When you give examples from the lives of real people, if you were to say, write about a person who is George Washington Carver, who is Black, and he is from a different era from us, I would hope that you would, if you're like me and you're a white lady, you might stop to consider whether your portrayal of him is accurate and sensitive to his culture and his race. So I'll take it a step further. I have read books that include a character that's a pastor's wife. I am a pastor's wife. And I have to say, some of those characters, their actions and their words do not reflect reality, or they contain certain stereotypes that I find offensive. I had to stop reading a book by someone I consider a friend. It was fiction, but the villain in the book was a pastor. And I had a serious problem with that. And he's running around on his wife, and he's stealing money out of the offering plate. And some of those tropes, someone used earlier, used the word tropes, that are often applied to pastors or pastors' families that I wish weren't there, because they do not reflect my experience, nor the experience of the vast number of pastors I know have never taken a penny out of the offering plate. But there is a stereotype in our culture that pastors are more prone to do that, or they see the offering as their personal, bank account. And most of them don't. But that trope exists, and it is insensitive. So let's explore 7 reasons why you might want to hire a sensitivity reader. Our primary goal, and let's state this right up front, is writing to challenge, not offend. Now, that is a fine line. And I discovered this, and I'll tell you, most of my experience, all of my experience with a sensitivity reader came when I was writing a Civil War novel that has still not been published. I love this book, and I'm invested in its message. And I realized, however, especially writing about such a controversial topic in today's culture, I wanted to be sure that I portrayed the African American or Black characters accurately, respectfully. And I do challenge racial stereotypes in my manuscript, but I want to be sure that I've done it in a thoughtful way, and that I've not written anything that if a Black person were reading it, they would find, well, there she goes, right? That's the last thing I want to do. I want people to keep reading. So I'm going to challenge some stereotypes, but it's not particularly my goal to offend. Now, if that is your goal, you're a writer who seeks to ignite controversy, this workshop is not for you. And there are people that they believe that is their mission. But most of us, I think, do not set out to offend. And if we do offend, it is inadvertent, and it is based on a misunderstanding that we may not even be aware of. And I know that's terrible grammar, but that inadvertent bias is what a sensitivity reader will root out of your manuscript. So I'm writing to challenge, not to offend. So reason number 1, and this easily goes in, I'm aware of my ignorance. There's a certain amount of humility that we need to carry as writers. And I'm struggling in this area between being humble, coming across as humble on social media when I'm doing a book launch. It's really a tough task, I'll tell you. And I have very much struggled with the whole idea of not coming across as like I know everything, writer, hey, read my book, it's so great, because that is not my heart. But my heart is that I am self-aware. And this is a hard thing to do when it comes to certain biases, is to be humble enough to admit, look, I don't know everything about living Black in America or living as a Black person during the Civil War. I don't know everything there is to know. So being aware of that ignorance is a necessary first step. And confessing and acknowledging that ignorance is a necessary first step, because I do want to challenge and not offend. You can't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. That is profound. It sounds kind of silly, but racism is sometimes underwater and bias. I'm not going to talk just about racism. I'm going to talk about bias. It's underwater. It's churning like the feet of a duck underneath the water, but on the top, you may not see it. And many of us live in a state where things might be churning below the water and we're just not aware of it. So it's like a submarine and it can torpedo even your best intentions. Jeremiah 17:9 says the heart is deceitful and sometimes wicked. This is one of the verses I learned just as a girl, memorize it. And if I am sincere about rooting out any wickedness in my heart, part of it has to do with exposing myself to the thoughts and ideas of people who are not like me. If I'm sincere in my desire to demonstrate God's love to all people of all races, then I must go through a time of self-examination. And sensitivity reading is one step beyond that. It is saying to someone from that subculture, tell me what I don't know. Tell me what I don't realize. So I believe, in fact, my experience, and I'll tell you more about it as we go through, my sensitivity reader was used by God. In Psalms, it says, search me, O God, and know my heart. My sensitivity reader was used by God to search my heart and to root out and expose some things that I frankly did not know. So reason number one, I don't want to be ignorant anymore of any unconscious bias that is in my heart. Reason number two, I want to gain understanding by developing relationships outside my own race, gender, and creed. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more insulated I am, the more isolated our culture has become. And that isolation can lead to what I call very homogenous relationships. Now, I confess, I can tell you I have Black friends, and please don't ever say that to a Black person as proof that you're not a racist, because they find that very offensive. But most of my friends are white. And I'll be honest, most of my friends are women. And I'll go even farther. Most of my friends are white female writers. Okay? So I have become, in some ways, insulated from ideas, thoughts, and interaction with people who are outside of my subculture. So human nature divides us. I heard someone say that Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour in the life of our nation. I believe that's true. Why? Everybody's at church. And most of our churches struggle to achieve any kind of racial integration or integration of political thought or integration either of spiritual thought. We tend to gather in fellowship only with people who are of our culture. So the decision to hire a sensitivity reader begins with the idea, I want a relationship. It's not just I'm going to hire a minion. I'm going to develop a relationship with a person and open my heart to hear what they have to say about what I've written. And along the way, to develop a friendship, a relationship that will change me, it will bless me, it will challenge me to be a better writer and a better person. By necessity, if you hire a sensitivity reader, you are going to enter into conversations and ideas that challenge you. And I don't know about anyone else. I welcome the challenge. I welcome the discussion and the interplay of ideas that challenge my presumptions, because I want my writing to be authentic. In order to be authentic, it has to authentically represent people from a different race, gender, or creed than mine. Every friendship is an opportunity to learn, and sensitivity readers, a good one, is often a highly accomplished professional. I'm not talking about, Granny down the street or the little old lady from my Bible study or even just a personal friend. I'm talking about someone interacting with someone whose mission is to challenge me and to point out for me ideas in my manuscript that might need to change. So interaction on this personal level allows a bond to form. And I'm going to go right ahead and out of the box tell you my sensitivity reader was Dr. Catherine Hutchinson. And she just came out with a book. Our books debuted the same month, and I'm excited for her. But she is on faculty at the University of Arizona, a very accomplished woman, a writer in her own regard. And we have become close personal friends. And I know that I could reach out to Catherine with a question at any time, and she would be willing to interact with me and answer my questions. So she has become not just a reader, she has become my friend, a connection across the racial divide. And in these days, I want to challenge you, we need those relationships more than ever. So, reason number 3, I want to validate my research. Now, I write historical, so I did a lot of research, and I'll tell you the book that I wrote. The activity is centered in my region, right here in Central Kentucky, in Jessamine County, where I was a resident at the time. I've moved, but it was at a recruiting center that was the second largest recruiting center for what they called U.S. colored troops. Now, I hope none of you would write a contemporary novel and use the word colored to apply to someone of African American descent. But in the day, that is the historical term, U.S. colored troops. And so most of the characters in my book are African American. They are former slaves, or in one instance, a free man, a Black free man from Massachusetts who had never been a slave. And one of the prejudices I discovered that many people have is that all African Americans were enslaved. That is not true. Many of them were free. And there in particular was an historical gentleman who left his family and his farm in Massachusetts, came to Camp Nelson, which is the recruitment center in Central Kentucky, and enlisted to be in the U.S. colored troops. An amazing, his name was Elijah Singer. If you want to just read a compelling story that will challenge some of your stereotypes, read about Elijah Singer, and you will find out what an educated, passionate, remarkable man he was. And I discovered him, and he's a character in my book. So that internet research, though, may lead to some false information. And please tell me you don't rely on the internet for everything, or only one site and Wikipedia where people are saying, it's colored with their opinions. Be sure that your sources are good. Even if you're very cautious, you may unconsciously absorb a so-called fact that isn't really true. And a sensitivity reader will help you discover and root those out. Some books may also bear the imprint of racial ignorance or unchallenged assumptions. I just mentioned one, that all African Americans in the US during the time of the Civil War were enslaved. That is not true, but that is an assumption many people make. Some authors reveal their underlying point of view and some don't. But don't assume that any author, website, book, whatever, is an expert, particularly one who claims to be an expert on a culture not their own. If a white person is going to teach me about Black culture, I want to know why they're authorized, why I should believe them. in understanding and experience from a culture that is not their own. So I want to validate my research and be sure I'm on track with the research I'm doing. Reason number 4, I don't want my book to become an inadvertent lightning rod for criticism and misunderstandings. Now, if you're Lee Strobel and you wrote The Case for Christ, you are planting a lightning rod in the universe and saying, hit me. I don't want to be that person yet. I might, but not now. And certainly not in my book that was set during the Civil War. I don't want it. I want it to spark conversation. I know it may attract criticism, but I don't see that as the book's primary purpose. The primary purpose of the book is to challenge some stereotypes about race, to understand the experience of Black soldiers during the Civil War. And it might be very different from what you think. It was different from what I thought, and I grew up here. So I don't want to be an inadvertent lightning rod. I often say, I don't want to wander into a minefield. If I'm going into a minefield, I know something might blow up, and I do that intentionally. I would not want to wander in, step on a landmine, it blows up, and I'm like, well, I didn't know that was there, right? Using and hiring a sensitivity reader helps you avoid that. God wants us to live at peace with all people. That's what he says in Romans 12. And he urges us not to sow discord among people. Now, I know there are certain people, I'm a descendant of Martin Luther. He meant to stir some people up and they needed it, okay? But that was a calling of his that usually it's an unusual calling for a person to become that controversial at God's behest. Some people are controversial without meaning to be. And those are the ones, like me, who should be looking into a sensitivity reader. Though I may receive criticism, I don't want it to be because I'm ignorant. I hate ignorance. And when I discover that I'm ignorant, I'm particularly, red-faced. I don't want to be ignorant. And one of the ways not to be ignorant is to interact and engage a sensitivity reader. So, reason number 5, I want to strengthen my proposal. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I encountered through all of this. One of the reasons I hired a sensitivity reader was the recommendation of my agent, Linda Glaze. And she was ready to send my book, but she said, Rhonda, before we do, I think it's a good idea if you engage a sensitivity reader. Why? Because I'm going into the Civil War, and many of our emotions and thoughts about race and racial relationships are colored by slavery and the Civil War. So knowing that I was going there, she said, it's a good idea. Why? You put in your proposal that your manuscript has been vetted by a sensitivity reader. And in my case, I named Catherine. I outlined that she had read it and given me her input, and then I also provided in my proposal an endorsement from her that she had read. And I love Catherine. She's very excited about my book. She wants it published as much as I do. However, right now, as of today, none of the traditional publishers are publishing books from the Civil War era. You say Civil War and you see the book shut. I mean, I've done it in appointments face to face. I pitched to an editor at a larger publishing house who was really interested in it. I sent it to her. She loved it, but she said, unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell you, our company right now, we're not publishing anything about the Civil War because of our current environment. Now, I found that very discouraging. I understand it because let's remember, publishers are businesses. They're in the business of making money. And if they think that a book on a certain topic is not going to find readership, or that it is going to attract controversy, they're a little leery. They're a little leery of it. And so the blanket statement for now is no civil war. And it's hurt me. I mean, physical pain to put this book on the shelf. But that's what needed to happen. But here's the good news. When they're ready again, I'm ready. And I've got a story that has been vetted by a recognized sensitivity reader who has given her endorsement that there should be nothing in there that would be ignorant or offensive to African Americans. So to strengthen your proposal, the names, the credentials of your sensitivity reader, how you hired them, it demonstrates that you've hired a professional. And let me just say, you could hand your book to me and say, Rhonda, would you read this from the perspective of a pastor's wife? And I could help you root out some of that stuff. And unless it's a great big job, I probably wouldn't charge you. Why? I don't have any credentials other than I am a pastor's wife. All right. But there are organizations, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, that vet their sensitivity readers to help you be sure that you have found someone with the understanding of what publishers are looking for and what publishers want or want to avoid. So it does strengthen your proposal if you have said that your manuscript with characters from a different subculture has been vetted by a sensitivity reader. Reason number 6, I see writing as a business, and hiring a sensitivity reader is an investment in success. There are certain expenses you expect if you go into business in a certain way. As a writer, I expect I'm going to have to pay sometimes for editing services. I might pay another professional to help me run my book launch. Hiring a sensitivity reader is a similar investment, and it is not inexpensive. I'm not going to quote prices to you, but I will say my manuscript was about 90,000 words. It was over $1,000 to have it vetted by a sensitivity reader. And I say that as a general figure to let you know it's not cheap, but it's worth it. I'm investing in the success of that book, the same way I invest in writers' conferences, the same way I invest in editing programs like Grammarly or AutoCrit, the same way I invest in other ways. I'm investing in my book by hiring a sensitivity reader. It will pay dividends. This is an investment that will pay off, particularly if you're able to avoid some of the drama that comes if you make an inadvertent mistake. Then reason number 7, and this is the last reason, then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to find a sensitivity reader. I want to market my book with confidence. I want to be able to tell people, if they get wide-eyed when I say that I'm writing in a Civil War novel, and people do, especially these days, they're just like, wow. And some of them, are you sure? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm sure. I know this message, the message that's in my book, the underlying questions that I'm asking and answering are really important. Now, more than ever, it's important that we look at the Civil War and slavery through a different lens, because the lens we've been using is broken. And now I'm about to start preaching, and I'm sorry. But the lens we have been using has not given us clear enough focus on what the issues really are. And this is a strong personal opinion, and how we address them today. And I'm doing that through fiction. I'm not writing a nonfiction book right now. But I say that simply discovering how things really were versus how we think they were is a first step toward reconciliation and true peace between races. So when I look at someone and I tell them that I'm ready to market my book, I'm sitting across the table from an editor, I know that I can be assured, I have a self-confidence, a self-assurance when they ask me, about any of these racial issues that I'm talking about. I know that I have Catherine sitting there with me virtually because she has read my manuscript. And later on in our after party, you can ask me about some of the things she pointed out. I'm not going to make myself vulnerable enough because this is going on the internet to tell you the mistakes I made. But I admit to you, I made some mistakes. They were inadvertent and they are no longer in my book. And that to me is worth every penny I paid to have my book vetted by a sensitivity reader. So if I do receive criticism or I do receive challenges, I can call upon the knowledge and expertise of my sensitivity reader to validate that I have done my homework and that there's a reason that I've written my scenes or my characters the way I have. So engaging a sensitivity reader, who would it be? Someone from the correct subculture. I'm not going to hire a white professor somewhere to read my book for sensitivity about African American issues, right? It has to be someone from the subculture, no matter how many degrees they have. The person should represent the subculture that you're wanting it read for. Qualifications, if they have education, if they are certified as a sensitivity reader, it's kind of hard because this certification is brand new. And I will tell you that I worked with Edwina Parsons at Harambee Books, but she's also one of the officials at the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference. There's a organization called Sensitivity Between the Lines. I contacted them and I asked them, could you connect me with someone? And they connected me with Catherine. And she has education and certification in sensitivity reading. So you contact an organization that vets the readers. And there are many of them online. And it's just like anything else. If you were going out looking for a hybrid publisher, you would vet them. You would talk to people who use their services. You would see, why they do what they do and get to know them well before you hire them. And I can only recommend the one that I've worked with because I had such a great experience. Others, I looked into others and somehow they just didn't seem right to me. It was a personal decision. And believe me, I was praying about who to work with. And I know God connected me with Catherine. So when you should do it during your final edit, when you've edited, and you may be going through, that's when you hire a sensitivity reader. And it takes about a month. So you need to plan in your timeline, depending on how long your manuscript is. You need to give them a reasonable amount of time to review, to work with you, the back and forth, and so forth. So plan on it taking at least a month. And in fact, when you're hiring someone, ask for a time estimate of when they think they can get to it and how it can fit in. It's just like hiring an editor of any kind, that you have to allow time in your production process to allow for that reader to do their job and to respond to their edits. I'm going to take questions here in a minute, but first of all, I want to share with you this verse. It's from Colossians 3:23 in the Passion Translation. Put your heart and soul into every activity you do. I'm going to emphasize the word every activity you do, as though you are doing it for the Lord Himself and not merely for others. I wanted to write a book that I would be pleased to offer to God and say, God, what do you think? How'd I do? Is there anything you want me to do that I didn't do? Because I'm doing this as an offering, not to readers. I personally, this is my call. I don't offer my book to readers. I offer my book to God. And the readers can come along for the ride. That's why I'm not investing too much in their reviews. I'm getting great reviews, but every once in a while I'll get a review that just a smack in the face. That's part of this business. But when my primary goal is to write for the Lord and to advance his kingdom, I can stand up a little better to criticism that comes from people who may or may not understand where I'm coming from as a believer, as a woman, as a Caucasian woman, who cares about social justice and issues of social justice. I care greatly. That should be reflected in my work. And by hiring a sensitivity reader, I'm certain that I've done everything I can to root out that bias that I may not be aware of. So lastly, I'll just say thank you. Thank you again for allowing me to come to Writers Chat. If you want to contact me, my website is rhondadragomir.com. I'm the only one in the universe with that particular name. I've never found anyone else with the combination of Rhonda, which is Welsh, and Dragomir, which is Romanian. So I'm a unicorn. Or you can email me with my first name, Rhonda, with an H, at dragomirgroup.com. So I'm going to stop my share now so I can see how many of you I put to sleep. Oh, you're all hiding behind your names there, but hopefully I've not talked any of you to sleep. But I will just ask Melissa or Brandy, were there anything in the comments or questions that I could answer?
Yeah, we have one. We have a couple, but first one is, but don't sensitivity readers have their biased filters? I've heard different things said by different readers on the same topic. So, like, how do you know what's what and who to listen to?
That's an excellent question. Now, I'm going to answer honestly, and if you're watching me on the internet, don't hate me. But I wrote a Christian book. It's Christian historical fiction. So one of the things I wanted from my sensitivity reader, I wanted her to be a Christian. And you can find sensitivity readers for all kinds of reasons, right? I chose them and selected them based on, I wanted a person who believes what I believe on a certain level, right? This is one reason I zoomed right by some of the selections, even though they were educated and so forth. If you read what's on their website, you read why they're doing what they're doing, you will be able to weed out people who might not be compatible with your worldview. And let's be honest, when you talk worldview, they come in every flavor of the rainbow and they didn't stop at 33 like Baskin Robbins, and those flavors do impact their viewpoint. All right. So I conducted an interview with Catherine before I hired her to know whether she believes as I believe about certain things, that we were on, let's say this, that we were on task concerning the big things, right? The little things we might have differences on, and that's okay. That's what makes us interesting as people. But I wanted to be sure that concerning the really big things, like being a believer who believes the Bible as the inspired word of God, I've got these filters that I put through before I decided to work with Catherine. I hope that makes sense. And then I will tell you what else. I didn't check my brain at the door. When she made suggestions, I took them as suggestions, not as commandments, because I'm the one who's done a lot of the historical research. I'm the one in touch first for me with God. And most of the time when Catherine emailed me and said, you might want to think about this, God is right there by his spirit saying, right? Or, oh, maybe that's not so important. I have to filter it through my voice as a writer. All right. And one of the things I discovered, you may not know this, but Black people don't like the color of their skin to be compared to items of food. I did not know that. So if I said her skin was the color of coffee, at least Catherine told me, people are tired of that. And I did not know that. So I had to go through, and then I had to ask her further, well, what would be acceptable? And it did not leave me a whole lot of room besides black and brown. And she even said yellow, because some black skin has a yellowish tint, right? And the differences between a black person who is light skinned and a black person who is dark skinned, there are particular ways of saying that that are non-offensive. Why? Because they use that terminology when they're referring to each other. And I have not heard Black people talking about the differences in their color of skin. That's not part of my experience. It's part of Catherine's experience. And she was able to open that little genie bottle, and I'm like, oh, wow. And I'm going back through my manuscript, changing these things. Why? I didn't want that to be a distraction. I want a Black person to pick up my Civil War novel and say, yes, she got it right. Because I eliminated something as simple as referring to the color of their skin as a food item. Because I didn't do that, they don't feel offensive. So guess what? Their guard comes down, and then my message has an opportunity to get through to that person. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. This is one other question that I saw. It's probably a little obvious on one hand, but just good to state. Do sensitivity readers have specialties?
Yes, yes, they do. And one of the reasons that I felt I meshed well with Catherine is because she reads a lot of historical fiction, and she has a background. If you go and look at her background, now it's funny. Her book isn't about Black people. Her book is a white FBI guy. All right, and she wrote him, and she's Black. And I don't know if she used a sensitivity reader or not. I will say she got it right. And we all have different levels of comfort. Her book, it's a thriller, and so it's a little gory. In fact, to me, for my taste for gore, it was way gory. All right. Other people don't have that, problem. And so I had to filter my feelings about what she wrote through my little lens of my tolerance for blood and guts, which is almost zero. I'm way on one end of that I just don't choose to read. I chose to stick with her book because I know her and I know her heart, right? So I didn't let my offense over that stop me from reading the book. And I'm way off from the question you first asked.
That was if they have specialties, so things they're experts in.
They do have specialties. And this is one of the reasons to look at sensitivity between the lines, because they will send you a questionnaire about your book. And then they look through the people they have vetted and that they know to find someone that they think is a good match. It's like a matchmaking service between writers and readers, sensitivity readers. And that expertise is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, even just looking, on the internet for sensitivity readers, you'll find that some will say, "Oh, I specialize in neurodivergent characters," or some will specialize in like depression or just other things. You're going to find all different kinds of people that will specialize in certain things, so that you can really hone in more on the issues of your book and finding somebody that will kind of be able to tap into that. You could find somebody that is a sensitivity reader for special needs.
Right. Or
Yep.
for autism is an emerging and a very important, other than race, a very important subculture.
Yep.
autism and parents who have autistic children often misrepresented in literature or spoken about in a way that is inadvertently offensive. And I know I have a cousin who has a son who's on the autism spectrum, and every once in a while I'll read from her a rant where she read a book and the character did this, and that is so unreasonable and it is so prejudiced, because she is an advocate for her son. I admire her. She is amazing, right? But part of what she does is expose cultural bias against her son. And it's important that we understand that. And that if I were writing an autistic character, I would definitely hire my cousin to read it, because I know she would root out any bias that I had.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to welcome people to come back on
Sure,
screen?
please do. Please come back live.
All
And
right.
let me see everybody.
If anybody has trouble getting back on, just give a shout out in the chat. We'll help you out.
And I will say, let me answer Pam's question a little more. There is, in the writing world among professionals, there's an ongoing discussion about whether this is necessary and whether it's helpful or not helpful. And I read articles about people who said it's not helpful and this is why. Why should we filter or filter out, the voice of the writer and la la la. And I've seen all kinds of arguments against it. All I know is my experience. In my experience, I needed it. My book needed it. And to me, that's enough. Now, part of my success is I got matched up with the right person. And that was very much God. Because it is the Wild West out there when it comes to political opinions and so forth. If you get into you march into the OK Corral, there's going to be gunfire. You just better expect it. Right? So realize that people do come with their own, and let's talk about spiritual bias too. And I don't want anybody rooting out my spiritual bias, because I'm so convinced of the truth of God's word, the inerrancy of God's word and so forth. I'm not willing to compromise there. So I'm not going to waste money on a sensitivity reader to root out the spirituality and the faith statements that are in my book.
We have another question in the chat. Leslie asks, how do you handle those who get offended by the specialist you may choose? Our school board invited a Black professor to come in and give a speech. He gave a lot of research to back his talk, but others were still offended. They said his research was not true because they didn't want to believe it.
Okay, I'm going to ask a show of hands. How many of you have ever offended anyone? Raise your hand. How many of you have ever offended anyone and you didn't mean to? Offense is part of our culture. And there's a great book by John Bevere called The Bait of Satan. If you've not read that book, you need to read that book, because he talks about offense as being something that Satan uses to bait us to fight with each other and disagree and get controversy, right? And I can choose not to take the bait. I can choose not to be offended. And this is one of the reasons I hired a sensitivity reader, because when my book comes out, and I believe it's coming out, I know God's hand was on this Civil War novel. When it comes out, I'm going to take fire. Incoming, it's just part of it, right? But when I respond in love, affirming everyone has the right to their own opinion. You don't have to believe what I believe, but this is why I believe what I believe. And thank you for reading my book. Thank you for caring about this issue. There are so many positive things you can say. And sometimes, now I'm a pastor's wife. I've handled a lot of criticism in my lifetime. All right. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing, especially online. But in person, In person, sometimes the best thing to say is, I'm glad you felt comfortable to tell me that. And you know what? That shuts them right up. That's for free. I ain't even going to charge you for that. Because when you thank someone I thank you for trusting me enough to tell me what you think. What it does, it comes back to the relationship and it tells them, I'm not going to let this issue divide or affect our relationship. I affirm you and your right to have an opinion. And we don't have to agree on everything. Hello, people. We do not have to agree on everything. We are different people and we're allowed to disagree without being disagreeable. Right? And that's a skill that is rapidly disappearing in our current culture. And I'm praying for a turnaround.
Yeah, well, the truth is we cannot control other people's opinions and reactions, but we can control ours.
Right. And let's affirm that they have their right to their own opinion.
Yep.
Right. Some people have said to me, Rhonda, you're so judgmental. Right. And I'm like, no, I'm not the judge. God's the judge. But I know the judge. And he's already given us his ruling on certain things. And I'm just agreeing with the judge. And I love you. You're going to meet him one day and you're going to give a reason for why you believe what you do. So if I disagree with you, it's out of a heart of love because I don't want you to face him one day. What are you going to say? Uh-oh. Or I didn't know. Right? I'm standing there saying you might want to reconsider. And there's a way to do that without being preachy and overbearing. The problem is many people, many Christians, let's be honest. Let's be just totally gut honest. Many Christians are disagreeable. Many Christians are judgmental. And they are too harsh in handing down God's judgment on people when they're not the judge. Right? So that's my 2 cents for today.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Do you have any final words for parting you would like to share with us?
The only thing I will say is that I do have a handout for this session, and I'm going to email it to Melissa or Brandy, who tell me who to email it to, so that it can be available on the Facebook group if you want to have the file with my notes. And I usually do a much more detailed PowerPoint presentation, but I'm having some issues right now, so I wasn't able to do that. But I did produce a handout that I'll be very happy to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's a great segue into our Writers Chat members page on Facebook. Come and join us. There you can find all of our shows, the announcements for what's coming up. And speaking of that, what's coming up next week is Writers as Speakers by Robin Dykstra. That is something you will want to be here for. It's a very frequent crossover, so I'm sure there will be a lot of great information. And please join us any Tuesday at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, and you can figure out your times around from there. We do have an international reach, so if you understand what we're saying in our language, come and join us live. You can do that by joining the Writers Chat members Facebook page, because we have all of the links up there. But then if you can't make it in person, you may look at all of our shows on YouTube. We have a playlist in Serious Writers channel on YouTube, and we put all of our shows up there, except for our unplugged ones, those you'll want to be here in person for. This one will be up later today, so we will have that available for everybody, and Writers Chat members will post that. But find us on YouTube, and there's a huge offering there to look at. Rhonda, thank you so much for coming today. This has been great information. You did not put anybody to sleep. This was good information, a good timing, and a very well-rounded perspective on sensitivity reading and our own insensitivities. And thank you very much for that. And so with that, we will stop the recording, but I ask everybody who is here to stay for our after party. We'll stick around for 10, 15 minutes or so and have a little bit further chat with our guest. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week.